in the immaculate suburbs of Prescott, Arizona, where every lawn is manicured and every mailbox stands at perfect attention. A war is being waged. It's a war fought not with armies, but with tow trucks and homeowners association violation notices. On one side, Evelyn Reed, a woman who treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom and its rules as her private weapons. On the other, Vance, a quiet, retired engineer who wants nothing more than the simple, predictable order of his woodworking shop. You might think you know this story. A petty dispute over a driveway. A lesson taught with a towing bill, but what you've heard is only the beginning. After Evelyn's pristine Lexus is towed from Arthur's property not once, but twice, the battle for a parking space escalates into something far darker. One quiet afternoon, two men in official-looking security uniforms arrive at Arthur's home. They claim they have authority from the HOA, but their target isn't Arthur. It's his visiting daughter, a successful black woman, who happens to be home alone. What happens when a petty neighborhood tyrant crosses the line from harassment to intimidation? And what crucial, terrifying fact does she not know about the quiet, methodical man she has just pushed into a corner? Join us as we unravel a story of quiet rage and hidden identities. We invite you to share your first thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy tales where justice is served in the most unexpected ways, consider subscribing to Deepu Cater Stories. The intrusion. The night was quiet, a specific kind of quiet you only find deep in the Arizona landscape, where the air is thin and the stars seem close enough to touch. In that quiet, a heavy-duty tow truck was creeping backward into a cobblestone driveway, its flashing amber lights washing over manicured desert shrubs and the pale stucco walls of a Spanish-style home. The light swept across the face of Arthur Vance. He was 62. He stood on his porch, arms crossed over his chest, his expression as still and unreadable as the granite mountains that gave their name to the community. He just watched. A pearl-white Lexus RX was hanging in the air, its wheels locked and useless, a monument to someone's mistake. Across the street, a door flew open. Evelyn Reed, 65, erupted from her house, her expensive silk pajamas flowing around her. Her face, usually a carefully composed mask of polite society, was twisted with rage. "Arthur, how dare you? You will regret this." Her voice was a shriek, a sound so foreign in the curated tranquility of Granite Peak Estates. It tore through the silence. Art just watched. No expression at all. This was the first expensive lesson, and it would not be the last. 3 months earlier, the quiet was all he had. It was what he'd paid for. Arthur Vance had bought the house after an early retirement from his career as a lead engineer for an aerospace corporation. He told people he wanted a place to finally focus on his woodworking. His workshop was his sanctuary. It lived in the garage, a place of profound and reassuring order. The scent of cedar and varnish hung in the air. Tools hung in perfect silhouette on a pegboard wall, each in its designated space, like soldiers at attention. A fine layer of sawdust covered every surface, a blanket of pale gold. This was a place of precision, of control. Every cut, every joint, had to be perfect. Order was something Art could manage. It was the antidote to a past he never spoke of. A past of chaos. And one mistake. The first time the Lexus appeared in his driveway, Art assumed it was a mistake. A visitor for the neighbors, perhaps, or a delivery driver who'd misread an address. He waited. He watched the clock on the workshop wall tick past an hour. Then 2. Eventually, the car left. He decided to let it go. Art was a man who avoided conflict. He'd had enough conflict to last a lifetime, but it happened again. A week later, then again a few days after that, it became a pattern. Evelyn Reed's pattern. He tried talking to her. Politely, he walked across his pristine, xeriscaped lawn to her front door. She answered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Art explained, calmly, that he needed access to his own driveway, that it was an inconvenience. Evelyn gave a dismissive little wave of her hand. "Oh, Arthur, don't be so petty," she said. That her tone, the one you'd use on a child complaining about a broken toy, it's only for a moment. Besides, it's not like you go anywhere. And that was that. The conversation, to her, was over. For Art, something inside him began to shift. Each time that white SUV sat on his property, it was more than an inconvenience. It was an intrusion, a disruption. It was a discordant note in the quiet symphony he had so carefully composed for his life. It stirred a feeling of powerlessness he thought he had left behind long ago. One afternoon, taking his daily walk, Art paused by the community notice board. A large, handsome sign made of carved oak, Granite Peak Estates, managed by the Homeowners Association. That phrase, HOA, Art had heard the neighbors mention it in passing. Quiet complaints about new landscaping rules or the approved palette for exterior paint. He had never cared. He just wanted to be left alone. But standing there, looking at the sign, he felt a strange chill. That sign? It didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like a warning. A long shadow, cast over all these quiet houses. A judgment, just waiting to fall. The paper trail. The breaking point didn't come with a shout. It arrived in the quiet condescension of a single sentence. "Oh, Arthur, don't be so petty. It's just for a little while." Evelyn had said it with a dismissive wave of her hand, her bracelets jingling softly. As she walked away to check her mail, she hadn't even looked at him, as if he were nothing more than a crack in the sidewalk, a minor imperfection in her perfectly manicured world. Something inside Art, a gear that had been dormant for years, clicked into place. He didn't get angry. Anger was messy, imprecise. Instead, a cold, calm clarity settled over him. The kind of clarity he hadn't felt since he'd traded his uniform for a wood lathe. He walked back into his house, the scent of cedar failing to soothe the new hum in his mind. That night, long after the Arizona moon cast long shadows across his yard, Art went into his small home office. It was as orderly as his workshop. He pulled out a fresh manila folder, with a black pen, in clean, block letters. He wrote on the tab, E.R. Driveway. He opened it. The empty folder felt like a void waiting to be filled. The old instincts, the ones he'd tried to bury under sawdust and varnish, surfaced. The investigator in him was awake. The next morning, Art's routine changed. Before heading to his workshop, he made a new entry in a small, leather-bound notebook. 7:14 a.m. White Lexus RX 350. Arizona plate. Parked obstructing western half of driveway. He took a photo with his phone, making sure the timestamp was visible. The click of the shutter was quiet. But to him, it felt as loud as a gavel. Later that week, a small, discreet security camera appeared under the eaves of his roof. Its lens aimed squarely at the driveway. It was barely noticeable, blending in with the stucco, but it saw everything. It recorded every arrival, every departure. It was an impartial witness. Collecting facts without emotion, Art was building a case. Each photograph was an exhibit. Each timed entry in his notebook was a line in an affidavit. He wasn't just a frustrated neighbor anymore. He was compiling a record, creating a paper trail so clear, so undeniable, that it would speak for itself. He was building a wall, brick by evidentiary brick. His investigation didn't stop at his property line. He needed to understand his adversary. Sitting at his desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating his focused face, he typed, "Evelyn Reed." Prescott into the search bar. The internet told him what the quiet neighborhood gossip only hinted at. He found the obituary for her late husband, a successful real estate developer named Richard Reed. He saw photos of them at charity galas, their smiles bright and confident. He found the public records for her property, the deed held in a family trust worth a small fortune, and then he found what he was looking for. On the official website for the Granite Peak Estates Homeowners Association HOA, under the Board of Directors tab, was her picture. Evelyn Reed, Vice President. Her influence wasn't just social, it was official. It was written into the bylaws. This wasn't a forgetful neighbor. This was an opponent with institutional power. This was a calculated display. Across the street, in a house twice the size of Art's, Evelyn Reed sat alone. The silence in her home was vast, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. She scrolled through old photographs on her tablet. Richard laughing on a boat. The two of them in Paris. A life that felt like it belonged to someone else. After he died, the silence had become a presence, a constant reminder of her new irrelevance. The invitations came less frequently. The phone calls dwindled. Her tablet chimed. An email. It was from the HOA management company. A resident was complaining about the placement of a decorative rock in their neighbor's yard. It was a trivial matter, but it was something to do. Evelyn's fingers flew across the screen. She typed a stern, authoritative reply, citing Section 4, Paragraph B of the community's aesthetic guidelines. She instructed the management company to issue a formal warning. As she hit send, a small, familiar warmth spread through her chest. Power. Relevance. She still mattered. She glanced out her window and saw the empty space in Art's driveway. He was home. His truck was in the garage. Yet he never seemed to be going anywhere. He just was. A quiet, self-contained man who didn't need anyone's approval. A man who, until recently, had barely seemed to notice she existed. And that, more than anything, was what she couldn't stand. It wasn't about the parking space. It never was. It was about making him see her, about leaving a mark on his orderly little world, proving that she was still a force to be reckoned with. She was Evelyn Reed, and no one, especially not a quiet woodworker, was allowed to forget it. The first expensive lesson. The hum of the laser printer was the only sound in Arthur's study. It slid out a single, crisp sheet of paper. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It was a document. He had spent the morning crafting it, choosing each word with the precision he normally reserved for a dovetail joint. The tone was formal, impersonal. It stated facts. It referenced the official governing documents of their community, specifically Section 7, Subsection B, which prohibited the obstruction of a homeowner's private property and access ways. The letter mentioned the dates and times of the repeated violations. It was a warning. A final one. He printed 2 copies, one for Evelyn Reed. The other he addressed to Marcus Thorne, president of the Granite Peak Estates HOA. A carbon copy. A simple, quiet move that changed the nature of the game. This was no longer just a chat between neighbors. It was now an official matter. On the record, he sealed both envelopes, walked to his mailbox, and raised the small red flag. The process had begun. The first response came not from Evelyn, but from Marcus. The phone rang late the next afternoon. Marcus's voice was smooth, conciliatory. He spoke of community, of harmony. He suggested it was all a simple misunderstanding, that Art and Evelyn should just talk it out over coffee. Let's not escalate this. Art, he'd said, it's not good for anyone. Art listened patiently. He thanked Marcus for his time. Then he hung up. The response from Evelyn was silence. A heavy, deliberate silence. For her, the letter was not a request. It was a declaration of war. That piece of paper, with its official-sounding language and its carbon copy to the Homeowners Association HOA, was not a warning. It was an insult, a challenge to her authority. The next morning, Art was in his workshop when he heard the familiar sound of her car. He looked out the window. The silence had been broken. He had known this was coming. The day before, a package had arrived. Inside was a professionally made sign, aluminum, with bold, red letters printed on a white background. It read, "Private property unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense, 24/7." He took the sign, a mallet, and a small level from his workshop. He walked to the edge of his driveway, where the manicured desert landscaping met the paving stones. He found the perfect spot. He drove the metal post into the dry Arizona soil. The grinding sound was oddly satisfying. He checked it with the level. It stood perfectly straight, a silent, unblinking sentinel. Not 2 hours later, the white Lexus appeared. It turned into his driveway slowly. Defiantly, it stopped directly beside the new sign, its front bumper almost touching the post. A clear, unmistakable message. Art watched from his living room window. He felt no anger, no surge of adrenaline, just a quiet finality. The feeling a man gets when he has considered all other options and found them wanting. He had given her a chance to retreat with dignity. She had chosen escalation. He picked up his phone. He dialed the number printed at the bottom of his new sign, Pioneer Towing. A gruff voice answered. "Yes." Art said calmly, "I need to report an unauthorized vehicle on private property. Is the property clearly marked?" "Sir, it is," Art replied, looking out the window at the Lexus parked beside the sign. Very clearly. The tow truck arrived in less than 20 minutes. Its flashing yellow lights seemed almost obscene in the peaceful afternoon sun, painting streaks of artificial color across the adobe walls of the houses. The driver, a burly man with a thick beard, got out, took one look at the Lexus, the sign, and gave Art a simple nod. The process was brutally efficient. Metal arms emerged. A thick chain was hooked to the car's axle. With a hydraulic whine, the rear wheels of the Lexus were lifted off the ground. That's when her door flew open. "Arthur, how dare you!" Evelyn stormed across her lawn, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. The tow truck driver ignored her completely. Continuing to secure the vehicle, Art stepped out onto his porch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your car was on my property, Evelyn," he said simply. "You will regret this. Do you have any idea who I am in this HOA?" Art waited until the driver had climbed back into his cab and started to pull away, taking the silent, helpless Lexus with him. He then looked directly at Evelyn Reed. "I believe you'll find your Lexus at Pioneer Towing," he said, his voice even and calm. "Based on my research, the fee to retrieve it, including storage for 1 day, will be approximately $350. He paused for a moment, letting the number sink in. "Consider it tuition," he added. For a lesson in respecting private property, Arthur had taught Evelyn the first expensive lesson, but this war was just beginning. How do you think Evelyn will retaliate, and will Arthur's calmness last forever? Let us know what you think in the comments below. We read them all and look forward to hearing your own stories about difficult neighbors. The paper cuts. Evelyn Reed was not a woman who accepted defeat. She absorbed the humiliation, paid the $350 towing fee with a tight-lipped fury, and then she began her war. It was not a war of loud confrontations, but one of quiet, bureaucratic aggression. A war fought with paper. The letters started arriving in Art's mailbox. One by one, they were printed on the official letterhead of the HOA. The first one was for the wind chime hanging by his workshop door, a simple thing made of bamboo that made a gentle, hollow sound in the breeze. The letter stated its color, a natural light tan, was not on the approved palette of earth tones. A fine, $25. A week later, another envelope. This one cited a violation regarding the decorative river rocks in his front yard. A cluster of them was allegedly encroaching 1.5 inches onto the common grass area. A fine. $50. Then another. A hairline crack in his concrete walkway, barely visible to the naked eye. A violation. A notice to repair within 30 days or face further action from the Homeowners Association HOA. Each letter was a paper cut, small, insignificant on its own. But the sting accumulated. They were designed not to deliver a knockout blow, but to wear him down, to annoy, to frustrate, to make his life of quiet order feel like a bureaucratic nightmare. This was Evelyn's territory, and she was the queen. Then came the phone calls from Marcus Thorne, the HOA president. He was a real estate broker, a man whose smile was as polished as the granite countertops in the homes he sold. His voice was always smooth, reasonable. Art. Marcus here. Just calling to see if we can't smooth things over. He'd begin. Evelyn is, well, she's an influential member of our community. A little apology, maybe a gesture of goodwill, could make all of this go away. It's for the good of the neighborhood. You know, we have to think about property values. Art understood Marcus's position perfectly. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about appearances, about maintaining a facade of perfect, harmonious living so the houses would continue to sell for top dollar. A public feud was bad for business. Marcus wasn't an obstacle of malice, but one of convenience. He just wanted the problem, which, in his eyes, was Art's refusal to bend, to disappear. The pressure mounted. The letters, the calls, the feeling of being watched. It began to fray the edges of Art's carefully constructed peace. The nights grew longer, and the old dreams returned. He was back in uniform. A military police investigator. He was in a small, sterile room. A stack of evidence photos on the table in front of him. A young soldier sat opposite, his face pale with fear. The evidence seemed clear, overwhelming. Art had followed the procedure, connected the dots, and written his report. He had been so sure, so logical, so precise, but he'd been wrong. He had looked only at the surface, at the paper trail in front of him, and missed the deeper truth. His conclusion, so perfectly assembled, had ruined an innocent man's career. The guilt of that failure was the reason he'd left the service. It was the ghost that lived in the quiet corners of his mind. He woke up in a cold sweat, the silence of his Arizona home feeling heavy, accusatory. He would not make that mistake again. He would not act on incomplete data. He would not be pushed into a hasty conclusion. This time, he would be perfect. So, with each new notice from the HOA, Art did not argue. He did not call Marcus back. He responded with methodical precision. For the wind chime, he downloaded the official HOA architectural guidelines, found the clause specifying that natural wood materials were exempt from the color palette rule, and attached a screenshot to his reply. For the river rocks, he went out with a tape measure and a camera. He took a photo showing the rocks were a full 3 inches inside his property line. He attached the photo, complete with digital measurements, to his email. For the hairline crack, he cited the community's maintenance bylaws, which clearly stated the Homeowners Association HOA was responsible for the upkeep of public walkways leading to the front door. Each response was calm, factual, and irrefutable. He sent them to the general HOA email address, CCing Marcus Thorne and the entire board. He wasn't just defending himself. He was building his own paper trail. He was turning Evelyn's weapons against her, transforming her acts of harassment into exhibits for a case he knew, sooner or later, he would have to make. The unexpected ally. The battle had settled into a silent, grinding war of attrition, a war fought with certified letters and emailed PDFs. For every violation notice Art received, he sent back a measured, factual rebuttal. He attached dated photographs. He cited the precise measurements of his lawn He quoted the HOA's own convoluted bylaws back at them. It was exhausting. A slow drain on the peace he had moved to Prescott to find. He felt isolated. A single homeowner against a faceless committee with Evelyn's fingerprints all over it. He had taken to spending his mornings at a small, quiet coffee shop downtown called The Grateful Bean. It was a neutral space. Far from the perfectly trimmed lawns and unspoken tensions of Granite Peak Estates, he'd sit in a corner booth with a black coffee and the day's newspaper, trying to reclaim a small piece of his orderly retirement. It was there that the war took an unexpected turn. Mr. Vance, the voice was soft. Hesitant. Art looked up from his paper to see a man standing by his table. He was older, perhaps late 60s. With kind eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, Art recognized him from the HOA website. Samuel Chen, the treasurer. That's me, Art said, his voice cautious. May I? Sam asked, gesturing to the empty seat opposite him. Art gave a slight nod. Sam slid into the booth. Placing his worn leather briefcase on the seat beside him, he seemed out of place. A man more comfortable with spreadsheets than social calls. I'm Samuel Chen, he said, extending a hand. Art shook it. Sam's grip was firm but gentle. I'm the treasurer for the Homeowners Association HOA. I know who you are, Art said, his tone flat, not revealing anything. Sam gave a small, weary smile. I imagine you do. Mr. Vance, Arthur. I've been reading your responses to the recent violation notices. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They are impressively thorough, meticulous. Even. Art just watched him, waiting. In his old job, he'd learned that the person who speaks first in a tense silence often reveals the most. Sam took a slow sip of the tea he'd brought with him. I am a man who believes in rules. Arthur, I'm an accountant by trade, retired now. Of course. But numbers. Numbers don't lie. Rules are supposed to create fairness. Order. They are meant to apply to everyone equally. He looked directly at Art, his kind eyes now holding a glint of steel. That has not been the case in our community for a very long time. Here it was. The opening. Art remained silent, letting Sam fill the space. I have been the treasurer for 5 years. Sam continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And for 5 years, I have watched Evelyn Reed treat the HOA as her own personal kingdom, and its funds as her private bank account. A new rose garden for the community entrance that happens to be directly in her line of sight approved. A request from the folks on the West End for a new speed bump near the park where their grandchildren play denied. Insufficient funds, she says. Sam's fingers tapped an anxious rhythm on his briefcase. I see the numbers. I know where the money goes. But I'm just an accountant. I present the facts. But Evelyn, she controls the narrative. She controls the votes. Marcus Thorne, our president, he just wants to keep the property values high and avoid any unpleasantness. He lets her do whatever she wants. He leaned forward slightly. But you don't bend. You don't get emotional. You respond with facts. With evidence, you fight her with logic. And she doesn't know how to handle that. I've been waiting for someone like you. The quiet confession hung in the air between them. An alliance was being offered. Art felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: relief. He wasn't entirely alone in this. Without another word, Sam opened his briefcase. He pulled out a small, black flash drive. It looked insignificant. Something you could lose in a pocket. He slid it across the table. It stopped just short of Art's coffee cup. This is everything, Sam said, his voice barely audible. The meeting minutes from the last 3 years, the official ones, and my own personal notes from the executive sessions. The complete financial statements. I've highlighted the discrepancies. The budget request she approved without a proper vote. The landscaping contracts awarded to her personal friend's company at inflated prices. He looked at Art, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm an accountant. I can find the problems. But I don't know how to build a case. I don't know how to fight her. But I think you do. I think you are the only one who can use this the right way." Art looked down at the flash drive. It felt heavy. Heavy with the weight of secrets and unspoken frustrations. This small piece of plastic held the truth. He slowly reached out and closed his hand around it. That afternoon, back in the quiet sanctuary of his office, Art plugged the flash drive into his computer. A single folder appeared on the screen, HOA, the real books. He clicked it open. For hours, he read. He cross-referenced spreadsheets. He read Sam's meticulous notes, which detailed the arguments, the dismissals, the sheer force of Evelyn's will in every closed-door meeting. He saw the pattern. It wasn't just petty tyranny. It was a systematic abuse of power. The evidence suggested a quiet, clever embezzlement. Masked by confusing budget lines and a sheer lack of oversight, the file labeled E.R. Driveway still sat on his desk. It suddenly felt small, almost insignificant. This was no longer about a parking spot. It was about a woman who believed she was above the rules, above the community she was supposed to serve. It was about the slow, corrosive decay of fairness. His fight had just gotten much bigger. And for the first time in a long time, the old investigator in him felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about restoring order. The second expensive lesson. Weeks passed. Arthur went silent. He answered the HOA violation notices with quiet, factual emails, but he initiated no new contact. He didn't complain. He didn't threaten. He simply existed. To Evelyn Reed, this silence was a white flag. She interpreted it as surrender. The old man had finally been worn down by the constant barrage of paper cuts, by the sheer administrative weight of her displeasure. He had learned his place. She had won. Feeling victorious, she decided it was time to reassert her social standing, to wash away the slight embarrassment of the towing incident with a display of effortless grace. She planned a Saturday afternoon garden party. It was to be an exclusive affair. The most influential members of their Granite Peak Estates community, including the ever-pliable Homeowners Association HOA president, Marcus Thorne, were on the guest list. It was a chance to hold court. To remind everyone who truly ran this neighborhood, the day of the party arrived. Bright and warm, white linen tablecloths fluttered in the gentle breeze on Evelyn's patio. Guests began to arrive, their luxury sedans lining the quiet street. There was laughter, the clinking of glasses, and then Evelyn made her final move. The masterstroke. She got into her pristine white Lexus, which she had retrieved at great expense and inconvenience. She started the engine, backed out of her own driveway, and drove the 20 feet across the street. With practiced ease, she parked her car directly in front of Arthur's garage, blocking it completely. It was more than an obstruction. It was a performance. She was parking not just a car, but a statement, a public declaration of dominance, executed in front of her most important peers. It said, "This man is nothing. His space is my space. The rules of our HOA do not apply to me." Guests saw it. Of course, they saw it. They exchanged subtle glances. Marcus Thorne shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie. They all looked across the street, towards Arthur's key at home, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The explosion never came. Instead, Arthur's front door opened. He stepped out onto his porch, holding a glass of iced tea. He did not look at the party. He did not look at Evelyn. He looked only at the car. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of calm contemplation. Then, he calmly pulled his phone from his pocket. He raised it, taking several clear, deliberate pictures of the Lexus, the garage it was blocking, and the audience watching from the party next door. Then, without a word. He turned and went back inside. His silence was more unnerving than any shout could have been. Inside, he sat at his desk and made a call. Pioneer Towing. "Hello," Arthur said. "This is Arthur Vance. I need to report an illegally parked vehicle again. Same address." There was a chuckle on the other end of the line. The Lexus. Art confirmed. "It's a Saturday. Do you have a priority weekend service?" "We do." "Sire, it's a bit extra, but we can have a truck there in 15 minutes. "That will be fine," Art said. "Thank you." The tow truck arrived like a judgment. Its yellow lights strobed across the faces of the party guests, casting long, dancing shadows. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a stunned, voyeuristic silence. The driver, the same burly man as before, operated with a familiar efficiency. This time, Evelyn's scream was one of pure, theatrical outrage. "Not again, you can't do this to me." She rushed towards the truck, her carefully constructed poise shattering into a million pieces in front of her entire social circle. The driver, unimpressed, continued his work. While she was occupied, Arthur's printer whirred to life. It produced a single sheet of paper, the emailed receipt from the towing company. He folded it neatly and placed it in his pocket. He walked across his lawn, past his sign, and onto the edge of Evelyn's property, stopping just as she was trying to regain some semblance of composure among her horrified guests. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply held out the folded paper. She snatched it from his hand. Her eyes scanned the text. "Weekend priority service. 505 00 impound and storage fee. First 24 hours, $75. 00 total due, $600. Ling ling." He leaned in slightly, his voice a low, calm murmur, just loud enough for Marcus and a few others to hear. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "it seems the tuition for the course on respecting boundaries has gone up." He paused, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "I do hope," he added softly, "that this time you've finally graduated." The gavel falls. Humiliated for a second time, in front of her entire social circle, Evelyn Reed decided the time for subtlety was over. She would use the full, crushing weight of her authority. Her final weapon was a formal hearing, an official proceeding of the Granite Peak Estates Homeowners Association HOA. The charge she levied against Art was intentionally vague and damning conduct detrimental to the peace and harmony of the community. She was confident she controlled the votes. She would see him fined, sanctioned, and publicly shamed. She would make an example of him. What she didn't know was that in Art's quiet home office, he and Sam Chen were preparing for the very same meeting. They weren't building a defense. They were building a prosecution. Every photograph, every fraudulent invoice, every highlighted line item from Sam's USB drive was printed, collated, and placed into a thick, 3-ring binder. Evelyn thought she was arranging a hearing. Art was preparing for a tribunal. The community clubhouse meeting room was thick with tension. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the dozen or so residents who had shown up. At the head of a long folding table sat the board Marcus Thorne at the center, looking uncomfortable, and Evelyn Reed, composed and regal, radiating an aura of absolute certainty. Sam Chen sat at the far end, his face an unreadable mask of calm. Evelyn, with Marcus's hesitant support, presented her case first. She spoke of a pattern of aggression, of unneighborly conduct. She painted a picture of Art as a petty, angry recluse who had escalated a simple parking misunderstanding into a public spectacle. She used words like hostility and intimidation. She concluded with a flourish, recommending that the board vote to fine Mr. Vance the maximum amount allowed by the bylaws and require his mandatory attendance at an anger management course. It was a masterful performance of victimhood. Then, it was Art's turn. He walked to the front of the room, placing his thick binder on the table with a soft, definitive thud. He didn't look flustered or defensive. "I'm not here today to defend my actions," he began, his voice calm and even, filling the quiet room. "They speak for themselves. I'm here to present evidence of a much larger issue, one that affects the financial health and integrity of our entire HOA." He started methodically. He displayed the photographs of Evelyn's Lexus, date and time stamped, projected onto a small screen for all to see. He showed the flurry of violation notices he had received immediately after the first tow, highlighting their trivial and retaliatory nature. He was laying a foundation, establishing a clear pattern of harassment. Then, he moved on to the second section of his binder. "The financials. Now," he said, his tone shifting from that of a resident to that of a lecturer. "Let's discuss the budget." He pointed to landscaping invoices from a company called Reed and Son Landscaping, totaling over $50,000 in 2 years, all for minor beautification projects concentrated on a single street, Evelyn Street. He showed consulting fees paid to a firm with no public record. The check signed off by Evelyn herself. "I have a question about this invoice," Marcus Thorne interjected, trying to regain control. "What standing do you have to question the board's approved expenditures?" Evelyn jumped in, her voice dripping with scorn. "Exactly. What do you know about running an organization like this? You're a woodworker. You should stick to your garage." Art stopped. He looked down at his binder for a long moment. As if gathering his thoughts, the room held its breath. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and direct. He wasn't looking at them as a neighbor anymore. "Before I moved to Prescott to find some peace and work with wood," he said, slowly, deliberately, "I served for 20 years in the United States Army Military Police Corps. For the last 7 of those years, my title was Senior Investigator. My specialty was internal affairs, procurement fraud, and abuse of authority." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Sam Chen allowed himself the slightest hint of a smile. Evelyn's face, for the first time, lost its composure. The color drained from it. Art tapped a finger on a highlighted expense report. "So, when I see documents like these in our Homeowners Association HOA records, I see more than just a violation of our bylaws. What I see, Mrs. Reed, Mr. Thorne, is a textbook case." The silence that followed was absolute. The hunter had just walked into an expertly set trap, and the jaws were snapping shut. Arthur had turned the tables. The past he had tried so hard to bury had just become his most powerful weapon. The hunter had become the hunted. How will this hearing end? Power, truth, and justice are hanging by a thread. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting "Boycott HOA" below, so I know that I still have friends accompanying me on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to continue telling the final part of Arthur Vance's story. The Reckoning. The air in the community room grew thick, heavy. The revelation of Arthur's past settled over the small crowd, changing everything. He was no longer just the quiet woodworker. He was an expert, an authority, and his quiet accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud. Then, a chair scraped against the linoleum floor. Samuel Chen stood up. He was holding a thin file folder. As treasurer of this HOA, Sam began, his voice surprisingly steady. "I can confirm the irregularities, Mr. Vance has highlighted. I have brought the corresponding financial statements with me. For years, I've had concerns." That was the turning point. Sam's validation opened the floodgates. Another board member, a woman who had long been overshadowed by Evelyn, cleared her throat. "I'd like to see those statements," she said, directing her words not to Evelyn, but to Sam. "I've often wondered about the budget for the beautification projects." The questions started coming, one after another. They were polite, measured, but they were relentless. They were aimed at the budget, at the minutes from past meetings, at contracts awarded without a proper vote. Marcus Thorne, seeing the tide turn with the brutal speed of a desert flash flood, began to distance himself. He shifted in his seat, turning his body slightly away from Evelyn. He spoke of the need for transparency, for accountability. He spoke as if these were his own ideas, his own concerns. He was a man cutting his losses. Evelyn sat motionless. She tried to interject, to dismiss the claims, but her voice had lost its power. The authority she had wielded for so long wasn't real. It had been a performance, and the audience was no longer playing along. Finally, the woman who had first asked to see the budget made a formal motion. I move for a vote of no confidence in Mrs. Reed's position on this board, she stated, her voice clear and strong. Furthermore, I move that we commission a full, independent forensic audit of the Homeowners Association HOA finances, going back 5 years. Someone seconded the motion immediately. Marcus, seeing no other choice, called for the vote. Hands went up around the room. It was nearly unanimous. It was over. Just like that, Evelyn Reed sat at the head of the table. A queen deposed in her own court. The small empire she had built on whispers and intimidation had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. She didn't say another word. The meeting adjourned. People filed out, speaking in hushed, excited tones. Arthur gathered his papers, his face showing neither triumph nor satisfaction. He had simply completed a task. As he walked out into the cooling evening air, he saw her. She was sitting alone on a stone bench near the parking lot, bathed in the orange glow of a sodium lamp. Her shoulders were slumped. The regal posture was gone. For the first time, Art didn't see an antagonist. He saw a lonely, frightened old woman. He almost walked past, but some impulse made him stop a few feet away. She looked up, her eyes glistening. She seemed to be speaking to herself more than to him. I just wanted them to see, she whispered. Her voice fragile, that I was still here. The words were a confession, a key that unlocked the motivation behind all of it. The arrogance, the bullying, it was all a desperate shield against the creeping fear of irrelevance. Art felt no anger, no sense of victory, only a profound, quiet sadness. He nodded slowly. There are better ways to be seen. Mrs. Reed, he said, his voice gentle. He then turned and walked to his car, leaving her alone with the consequences. The reckoning was swift. The audit revealed years of mismanagement and petty financial abuses. Evelyn was formally removed from the board and received a letter from the HOA's new legal counsel, demanding she repay several $1,000s in misallocated funds. A week later, a short, formal email went out to all residents. Marcus Thorne had resigned as president, effective immediately. In his place, the board had nominated Samuel Chen to serve as interim president, tasked with restoring order and trust in their community. The quiet accountant had inherited the kingdom, the quiet order. Change came to Granite Peak Estates. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, gradual, like the turning of a season. Under the interim presidency of Samuel Chen, the Homeowners Association HOA began to feel less like a monarchy and more like a community organization. The monthly newsletters, once filled with stern warnings and reminders of obscure rules, now included profiles of new residents and information about local charity events. The budget was posted online for all to see. Decisions were made not in closed-door sessions, but in open meetings where residents were genuinely encouraged to speak. The thick atmosphere of suspicion and resentment began to thin, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of trust. The shadow of the HOA no longer felt like a threat, but more like a structure meant to support, rather than control. Arthur watched it all from a distance. He didn't attend the meetings. He didn't need to. His part in the story was over. Then, One Tuesday morning, he saw it. A large, white moving truck was parked in front of Evelyn Reed's house. Men in uniforms were carrying out boxes and carefully wrapped furniture. There was no fanfare, no dramatic farewells. She was simply leaving. A few days later, a stark, impersonal, for sale sign was hammered into the pristine desert lawn. The house across the street was no longer a rival territory. It was just a house again. Empty. Waiting. That afternoon, Art was in his workshop. The scent of cedar filled the air. He was working on a small, intricate jewelry box for his daughter. A piece that required absolute focus and a steady hand. He was making a final, delicate cut with a chisel when he paused. He looked at his hands, at the tool, at the perfect line he had just carved into the wood, and in that quiet moment, a weight he hadn't fully realized he was carrying simply lifted. The ghost of his past, the mistake that had driven him from his first career, had always been a fear of causing chaos through error, a fear of getting it wrong and hurting someone. But this time, he had gotten it right. He hadn't acted out of anger or ego. He had been methodical, patient. He had followed a process, relying on facts and the rules as they were written. He hadn't created chaos. He had restored order. He realized he hadn't just been fighting for his driveway. He had been fighting against the memory of his own failure. By handling this conflict with the precision and integrity he had once failed to apply, he had, in some small way, redeemed a part of himself. The guilt hadn't vanished, but it no longer held the same power over him. He was not a man defined by his worst mistake. He was a man who knew how to build things, how to fix what was broken. A few months later, the for sale sign was gone, replaced by a small, cheerful welcome mat. A younger couple, maybe in their late 50s, had bought the house. Art saw them sometimes, working in their garden or walking their dog. One evening, Art was sitting on his front porch, nursing a cup of coffee as the sun set, painting the Prescott Mountains in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and still. The driveway before him was empty, a clean, unbroken stretch of paving stones. It was a simple thing, but it felt like a profound luxury. The new neighbor, a man with a kind face and an easy smile, was walking by. He saw Art and raised a hand in a friendly wave. "Evening," he called out. Art smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. He raised his cup in return. "Evening," he replied. The man continued on his walk, and Art was left alone with his thoughts. The quiet had returned. The peace he had moved here to find was finally his. But it was a different kind of peace now. It wasn't the fragile peace of avoidance. It was a stronger, more resilient peace. One that he had fought for, one that he had earned. Order was restored, not with shouts, but with patience and procedure. Arthur Vance had taught Evelyn Reed an expensive lesson, but in the process, he had also learned one of his own, that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to face it with wisdom, courage, and a moral compass that never wavers. And sometimes, to protect one's sanctuary, an old soldier must once again put on his invisible uniform. What does a person truly fight for when they defend their small piece of the world? For Arthur Vance, it was never just about a driveway. It was about restoring a quiet order, not only to his street, but to his own soul. Perhaps the most telling moment wasn't when the tow trucks arrived, but the quiet instant he saw Evelyn Reed on that bench, no longer a powerful HOA Karen, just a lonely woman, afraid of being forgotten. It reminds us that behind the most frustrating conflicts are often deep-seated human fears. The story teaches us that patience, when paired with methodical action, can be more powerful than any outburst. If you've ever faced a similar struggle for your own peace and quiet, we'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore the deeper currents of everyday life, please consider subscribing to Deepu Cotter Stories. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and for being a cherished part of our journey.